The Holy Gospel this evening comes from St. Luke in the 20th chapter. Now, some Sadducees, those who say there is no resurrection, came to Jesus and asked him a question. Teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies, leaving a wife but no children, the man shall marry the widow and raises up children for his brother. Now, there were seven brothers. The first married and died childless. Then the second and the third married her, and so in the same way all seven died childless. Finally, the woman also died. In the resurrection, therefore, whose wife will the woman be? For the seven had married her. Well, Jesus said to them, those who belong to this age marry and are given in marriage. But to those who are considered worthy of a place in that age and in the resurrection from the dead, neither marry nor are given in marriage. Indeed, they cannot die anymore because they are like angels and are children of God, being children of the resurrection. And the fact that the dead are raised, Moses himself showed in the story about the bush, where he speaks of the Lord, of the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Now, he is not a God not of the dead, but of the living. For to him all of them are alive. Then some of the scribes answered, Teacher, you have spoken well, for they no longer dared to ask him another question. The gospel of the Lord. You may be seated. You know, I just before we get going too far here, I just want to tell a quick little story for you folks. It's only going to be for Saturday. I'm going to be part of my regular sermon, so put it on there, Chris, so the rest of the people will be like, "What did he never told us one?" So in a few weeks, Chris and I are going to be going out to San Diego to meet with the Society for Biblical Literature and the American Academy of Religion, which is the largest professional organization for professional theologians in the world. And so these folks are in charge of, there's going to be 14 to 20,000 of the best biblical scholars, theologians, those kind of folks. Then there's going to be people like Chris and I, so we didn't, so there's all kinds of good stuff, and then there's us. But these folks know what they know, and so I've been reading a lot about this particular text, and I just want to run this by you as just a representative sample of our world. Okay, you guys don't have to. I'd like you all to vote. Okay, but we're going to do a little vote. It's going to be. I'm going to ask a question. It's going to be yes or no. You can either vote yes or no. But I just want to feel if those folks are really right, or if my instinct is really right, which is going to be pretty obvious once I ask the question. So the way it is this. The story goes that these Sadducees, now you've got to remember, these are the educated elite of a Jewish society, all right? These are the people, these are the professional theologians of their particular time. Pharisees, for example, you didn't need to necessarily have any formal academic training, but as a Sadducee, you went to school, and you came from a long line of people who went to school. So they asked Jesus this question about levirate marriage, which is what the topic is about. And levirate marriage in the Jewish tradition is simply this. Because it is a patriarchal society, property and wealth are passed on in the males, not in the females. And so what the Jewish tradition said was that the first and oldest male got to inherit everything. All the other males in the family got nothing. Fair rule if you're first, not so good for 2 through 29. So what happens, though, is that you have to actually have a male. You could have 16 girls, and it would still go to one of your nephews. It wouldn't go to any of your own children. It would go to the oldest male from your brother's or your sister's side of the family, and your brothers before your sisters, obviously. That's the system that they're in. And so the Sadducees, who know this system, they're part of the people who made it up, they asked Jesus a very simple question. They said, imagine there was a guy who had 6 brothers, all right? And he goes to marry a woman, and before he can have a boy, he dies. Now, in levirate marriage, what happens is if your brother, if the oldest boy in the family does not have a male heir, it's up to the younger brothers and sisters to get that woman pregnant with a male heir. It doesn't help to add more females to the mix. So, Because he dies before he can have a boy, then the second brother steps up. He dies before he can have a boy. Third brother then falls, and this is how it goes. All 7 of them, the Sadducees say, all right, all 7 of them die before there's a boy in the family. So in the resurrection, Jesus, now, and this is another thing about the Sadducees, they did not believe that people were resurrected from the dead. They believed that once you were dead, you were dead. They were sad, you see. You're never going to forget what a Sadducee is now, are you? All right. The Pharisees believed in right and wrong. They were fair, you see. These are simple things that we learn in seminary, and I feel after $75,000 of education, I should pass them on to you. So, thank you, you're welcome. So anyhow, these Sadducees, right, they know about levirate marriage. They don't believe in the resurrection, so they go to Jesus, who believes in the resurrection, who's preaching about the resurrection. And they ask Jesus this elongated, made-up question about levirate marriage. And they ask him, they say, in the resurrection, therefore, whose wife will the woman be? Now, here's my question. Do you think when the Sadducees ask Jesus that, they are doing it because they are generally seeking the right answer, or are they just giving Jesus sass? How many think they're giving Jesus sass? Please vote only once. How many think they're just giving Jesus sass? They don't believe in the resurrection, right? And so they're going to Jesus. So here's in this story, who's going to be resurrected? Who's going to be, right? How many people think they really want to know the answer to that question? One. Okay. I'm in the majority class. Those of you who really want to know that, that's great. I appreciate that. But it seems to me that what's going on here is that these Sadducees are giving Jesus a hard time for believing in the resurrection. And indeed, I think part of it goes, and this is why I'm hoping that for those of you who went to say that they are seeking an honest answer to it, it's because it's impossible for us to imagine the resurrection. I mean, all we have about us is this reality, is this world. I'll give you a classic example of imagination, but the limits of the imagination as well. Earlier this summer, Chris and I took Asher and my mom to play medieval putt-putt golf down there in Elkhorn. And medieval putt-putt golf is basically just a mini golf course that's all filled with dragons and knights and damsels in distress and other medieval things. So we decide to do this, and we play a game, and they have all kinds of fun little things where one of the things you put a ball in a trebuchet and you shoot it, and then you put a putting after that. And it's a very fun thing. And Asher, at 4 years old, loves this particular putt-putt. First time he's ever played putt-putt golf, and so he loves it. He's learning all the rules. He's playing in this kind of medieval fantasy world. So we come home, and we're sitting there later on that evening, and we're going to settle in to do something. And Asher says, I want to play putt-putt golf. And Chris says, well, Asher, we're not going to go play putt-putt golf. It's late now, and it's way down in Elkhorn, and it's kind of far away. And he said, oh, no, not real putt-putt golf. I want to play imagination putt-putt golf. Now, those of you who have had 4-year-olds in your lives, whether they're children or grandchildren, know that they have these imaginations. And so we say, well, I guess we could play some imagination putt-putt golf. And then he says, okay, get up and follow my dots, which means follow me. He always says, follow my dots because of some video game he watched. I don't know. But anyhow, so we are walking around the parsonage, all 4 of us, and we're all adults, by the way, just so you know. Iffy about me, but my mom and Chris, many of you have met them, that you know they're adults. And we're following this 4-year-old around playing imaginary putt-putt golf for a good 45 minutes. Now, what's interesting, of course, is that Asher could imagine the parsonage to be the putt-putt golf course that he had played a few hours earlier. And that takes some real imagination, because as much as, we have just a house and we don't have a lot of dragons around there, we don't have any trebuchets or knights in shining armor or any of that kind of stuff. So it takes some imagination for this kid to imagine all the stuff that he's doing, and he's having us replay some of the holes that we had done earlier that day. It's quite a feat of imagination. But, and here's the interesting thing, it's still putt-putt golf, and it's still based on something he had previously seen and known. And that's what Jesus is reminding the Sadducees. The Sadducees, whether they're honestly seeking to know what the resurrection is, or whether they're just giving Jesus sass, they are basing their idea of the resurrection based on what they already know about our world. Levirate marriage, in this particular case. They know about Levirate marriage, it exists in our world, and they assume then in the resurrection, Levirate marriage, or some kind of marriage, will exist. What Jesus wants us to see is that when he's talking about the resurrection, he's talking about something beyond our imaginations. Something we can't even imagine. Things, if you can imagine it, it's not the resurrection. He says it's like being a child of the resurrection. It's like being an angel. So when we talk about the resurrection in Christianity, know that what we're trying to do is explain this next stage of life, whatever it may be. But the one thing Jesus wants to remind us of is don't necessarily base it on the stuff you see on this side of the veil of death. Because that's not how resurrection works. Now, a couple of us in this room on Thursday went down to see the St. John Bible Project. And it's going to be at the Jocelyn Museum through the middle of January. And I do encourage all of you, if you have any interest in art or any interest in the Bible, or if you're just interested in seeing something really cool that hasn't been done in about 500 years, go down and take a look at these 78 pages from the St. John Bible. And the way the Bible is, the way the show is organized, you start out at the beginning in Genesis and Exodus, move through the New Testament and the Gospels, and of course you end in Revelation. Now here's the interesting thing about Revelation. The book of Revelation is all about John of Patmos, who sits on an island and tries to imagine that which cannot be imagined. And so that everything that John writes about in the book of Revelation is the biggest number that they knew, +1. It's the greatest thing they've ever seen, +1. But he didn't know how to do the +1. He didn't know how to get on the other side of the veil because his imagination could only be stopped because of what he knew or what he saw or experienced in his world. But nonetheless, there are artists who consistently try to push that envelope, who create wonderful works of imagination and love. And I would love to be able to show you a picture from the St. John Bible, but that is illegal. We don't have rights to be able to do that. But what these people are trying to do is explain what life is like as the resurrected life. And what Jesus wants us to remember is that it's not necessarily based on anything we know here. And of course, for the Sadducees, they're sad because they live at the top of the food chain. And they are going to be sad that they're not going to be able to enjoy many of the things that they enjoy now. And perhaps you might be sad to not be able to enjoy many of the things that you enjoy now. I mean, if I think about it and I say to myself, in the resurrection, if I couldn't have a fun experience of playing imaginary golf with my mom and my wife and my grandson, I would be sad. That's one of the highlights of 2019 for me. The actual putt-putt golf, whatever, I've done that 1,000 times, but the imaginary golf in my living room, now that was new. I would be sad to miss the relationships of friends like you, of music like Susie. I would be sad if the resurrection didn't allow me to experience so much of the beauty that I've seen in this world. But that sadness, Jesus says, is overcome by the incredible love and life of God that is eternal and carries with me on the other side of the veil of death. That what happens when we have the resurrection is that we are then picked up and scooped up in the love of God. And not only then do I see the wonder and beauty of the things that I've experienced, but now I get to see the wonder and the beauty of the things that you've experienced. The things that you've seen that have made your life a life of hope and peace and love. And you're not trying to tell it to me or explain it to me in words that don't quite do it, but rather I can see as if I was having the experience with you. And all of us, not only in this room, but all throughout Christianity, throughout the world, will be gathered together to experience this beauty, this grace, this truth. Not only will you get to experience what it feels like to play putt-putt golf, but I will get to experience the beauty of what it means to be you, loved by a child of God beyond your wildest imagination. Now, I've borrowed the phrase wildest imagination from my friend Eric down in Omaha. But I love it because I'm firmly convinced that no matter how many crazy things we imagine, we are never, ever going to circumscribe heaven. We're never going to be able to say that this is where it stops and this is where it starts. Heaven will always exist beyond our wildest imagination. On my door in the office, I have quotes. I have pictures that kids have drawn during my sermons. Anything that anyone gives me, I put up there. My most famous line of poetry comes from Robert Browning, who wrote a poem about the Italian Renaissance artist Andrea del Sarto. And in that, Browning said, "Ah, that heaven should exceed man's grasp. That heaven should exceed, be beyond man's grasp. Else what's a heaven for?" What's the point of having a resurrection if it's only going to give us the same old that we've slogged through? What's the point of having a resurrection if the pain and despair that we have been part of in our lives are going to be carried with us on the other side of the veil of death? It desperately needs, as its very reason to exist, to be beyond our expression, whether it's art or words or music or love. And what Jesus wanted to tell those Sadducees 2,000 years ago is precisely what I hear him telling me tonight. Scott, don't worry. It's not going to look like this. And I know you're going to be sad, but I promise you, when you get there, it'll be a whole lot better.